This is a session that I created largely out of a conversation I had with a colleague of mine where we were largely bemoaning the role of product owner and how it always seems to be a frustrating role, or at least a role that frequently frustrated us as Agile coaches, and we tended to do a lot of our work with our product owners on the various teams who are working in, and just debating why that always seemed to be a challenge. And at one point in that conversation, I said, the product owner, it's almost like an Agile anti-pattern. It seems so broken all the time. There must be something better than this. And originally, this talk was actually called The Product Owner is an Agile Anti-Pattern. About it, thought it was a good name, and then that evening wrote a submission for a conference in London, last year's Agile in the City. And lo and behold, the talk got accepted, at which point I then thought, oh crap, I'm going to have to actually make a talk about this. So I did, as it evolved, the idea of the talk, and through various conversations, its name changed as well. So welcome to the 5 pillars of collaborative product ownership. So my name is John LeDrew. I have been in the software engineering space for the best part of about 20 years. And I've worn many, many different hats in that time. So as well as being a technical lead, project manager, architect, software engineer, tester, team lead, development manager, business analyst, I've also been at various times a product owner. So before we begin, Mohammed already asked this question, but could I ask the real product owners in the room to stand up, if that's okay? Now, I'll extend this to people that are sort of BAs that are pretending to be POs occasionally. People that could I ask you to stand up, if that's all right? All right, and I want to give you some little stickers. So this one says, "I'm the single wringable neck." There you go. This one says, I don't know, I think this is about right. This one says, "It's all my fault." All right. This is a new phrase that I learnt the other day. This one is, "I'm the one throat to choke." So I thought was quite a nice phrase. There we go. Can you stick that on? And you're going to get, this one says, "I'm probably going to be fired for this." There you go. That makes you feel good about the role. So let's ask first, who's heard? You can sit down now. We'll come back to those. Who's heard some of these phrases before? Yeah, I think we have. Amazingly, some of those phrases are in fact coined by the very people that created the relevant frameworks that are there. And this has always been a point of massive challenge for me, because, well, apart from the obvious violent language that's used in many of these descriptions, how does it, who kind of understands, so who believes that the product owner should be solely accountable for the outcome of the project, and that is an essential component? Does anyone really believe that? Truly? So who's a product owner who believes that they are made potentially accountable, regardless of their beliefs or whether or not that should? Is anyone in that relationship at the moment? They feel the pressure? All right, so who might be in trouble who is accountable if a project fails in some way, especially if it fails to deliver value? Is anyone in trouble? The team. Yeah, there is a lot of deflection. I've seen that. The product owners do tend to be occasionally quite good at pushing blame downhill, as is the way. Yeah, no, it absolutely is, and I think that anyone that kind of thinks that in any situation where people are collaborating and delivering software, that there is any one individual that's ever at fault in any of those situations, short of maybe someone that decides to get drunk, stay up late, and wipe the laptops of the entire team, which I don't know. I don't think that happens that often in my experience in software. In 20 years, I've not yet seen that happen. So I think that's so short of like deliberate sabotage, you rarely have a situation where it is one person's head on the line. And yet, we seem to believe in corporate culture that there needs to be a single head on the line, so to speak, sometimes. And it seems that this idea of a single point of accountability, or a single individual to be responsible, it's seen as a benefit in product ownership. It's not necessarily, if it's not a blame chain, so to speak, it is actually more of a point of communication. We have 3 million different stakeholders that have an interest in this project. It would be chaos if they all communicated with us directly, so we will create a single person that has to talk to all 3 million of those people rather than them talking to other members of the team. And that's also potentially a problem and troublesome. But, I get it. We wouldn't want the engineers on the team to have to speak to actual customers or important business people, because that really would be the apocalypse. So let's make use of some of your Post-it notes. So what I'd like you to do for 30 seconds, individually and on your own, to begin with, I'd like you to think about what's the first word, one word that comes to mind when you think about the traits of a good product owner. What's a thing that a product owner needs to display or demonstrate, or a skill they need to have? So just think for 30 seconds, and I'll let you know when that's up. Just think individually about that and hold on to that word. Okay. What I'd like you to do now is, before I sort of loosely grouped you together in some random way, but you don't have to be stuck to that grouping if you don't want to do, if you really hate the people I grouped you with or something. But assuming you don't, if you could form groups of 2 to 4, depending on who's near you and who you can easily turn around to see, discuss those things. You have a couple of minutes. Discuss the words that you came up with. And if you could kind of agree on as a team, 1 or 2 words, that just write them down on your Post-it notes and be ready to hand them down in a minute. So you get a couple of minutes. You can have a couple of words. Think about yeah, 2 to 3 words maximum. 30 seconds left, so if you can kind of try and bring your ideas into one place and get them written down, that would be great. Okay. So if you could possibly just pass these Post-it notes down, and I'm going to stick them up and read them out as we go. So just pass them down towards the front and I'll come and grab them. All right. So pass them down here. Any more Post-it notes? Oh, God, people just thinking out of the box all the time, you know. It's such a pain, these people that just can't follow basic instructions as given, you know.
Thinking outside the box, that text could be half off first.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, you know. Oh. God, it's these original thinkers you need to be wary of, you know, putting it all on the same Post-it. All right, so I'm going to go through a few of them. So a key thing we've got here. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I missed some. Wow. All right. Well, two to three, but you know, very. They're all really small. Okay. So we've got communication, passionate, decision maker, domain knowledge. So these are all pretty important, especially so domain knowledge. Who came up with domain knowledge or something related to that? Just raise your hand if you had those ones. Explain why domain knowledge is really important. Tell me if it's not obvious, but just explain from your perspective why is having domain knowledge essential? Can product owners do it without that? Sorry, go on. Yeah. Yeah. Is it possible to be a PO without domain knowledge? Just as a general question. Is that possible? Possibly not.
It wouldn't be very inspiring or effective to start with. It requires you'd struggle with where the real value is.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about, so here we've got lots of stuff relating, decision maker, decisiveness. It seems like decisions are pretty important. Why are making decisions important for a product owner? Okay, so you've got to make the decisions specifically. Okay, all right. Then we have good communication. Lots and lots of stuff relating to communication. Why is it good to be a good communicator? Why is that important? Because you've got to communicate the decision you made with your domain knowledge, yeah. Sorry, go on. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Then we've got a few here. I'm just going to put that up there and go through that separately because there's like 5 million on that. So we've got a couple of ones that are interesting here. So we've got knowledgeable, open-minded communication. Available and availability. Why is availability important to a product owner? To availability to ask questions.
You've got to fit things into a 2-week sprint. If you can't get a hold of the product owner for 2 weeks,
that could be a problem. Yeah. So, out of interest, with regards to availability, who here works on a team at the moment with a PO? Okay. Who can get an answer from their PO? Leave your hands up if you can get an answer from your PO within 2 weeks, normally. Okay. Within a week? Guaranteed, you get an answer within a week. Within like 3 days? Take it down if you can't do it within 3 days. All right. Within a day? Within an hour? Yeah, again. within 1 minute? Yeah, right. So are they co-located PO, I'm guessing? Yeah, okay. It's always slightly depressing when I ask those questions, that the fact that there's often, in general, regardless of the size of the room, only normally 1 or 2 people with a co-located PO. I point out, despite that being generally a necessitated requirement in most of the common Agile frameworks. Okay, I'm just looking for some outliers here. We've got passionate. Why is it required to be passionate as a product owner, and what does that mean? Go on.
Well, I said, if you're passionate about the product,
Yeah.
that will rub off into your team.
Yeah.
And equally, I've been in a situation where a product owner didn't do a market, so that equally rubbed off into the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, could you argue that that's pretty much a requirement in theory for kind of any team member in some respects? You want that passion and interest in what they're doing.
But it does come if the product owner, if he steals it,
Yeah.
it rubs off.
Yeah. Can you be too passionate? Don't know. Could it get annoying? Could it be like working with, I don't know, Jim Carrey or something like that on your team? You know, so potentially. Now, there's a few interesting ones that, for me, are sticking out here. One is, all right, passionate. I'm going to call that enthusiastic. Good listener. Who said good listener? Why do they need to be a good listener?
I think it's about listening to your customers.
Okay.
Really understanding what they're saying. It's about listening to your team. They're telling you one thing, but you're off track. You might need to do something different. And listening to the guys about the solutions that you have. Don't just get fixated on one.
Okay. That was an interesting thing there. We'll come back to that, but you said the solutions you have as a PO. Do you think the PO has the solutions?
No, but the team will help them discover the right solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wondering. And then you have adaptable. That was a lone ranger. Where is adaptable come in here? Who said adaptable? Yeah. So what's about being adaptable?
You've got to be able to adapt to change. Project's not going to follow a predetermined route from start to finish. It's going to change. You've got to be able to adapt to it.
God, all those plans. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I'll ask that one at the end. So we've got, and there's also considered. What does considered mean in this context? Who said considered? I'm going to admit to it. There's no wrong answers. Considerate or consider. Was it considered or considerate?
Yeah, so there's the opposite of
No,
positive.
okay. So just thoughtful, mindful, maybe. Okay. All right. So being not kind of running in gung ho, so to speak. Then you've got this one, which knowing good. You said knowing good. Knowing good. why are you laughing at that? Why is it right? So what does knowing good mean?
Means they've got to have an idea of what they want the final product to look like before it's.
Okay. All right. So they've got to have some vision of the product. Yeah. Okay. All right then. I'm just going to make sure I haven't missed any ones from this list here, just because there's 9 of them, you know. So we've got a couple of ones I think that we haven't covered. Integrity. So why do they need to have integrity, and what does integrity mean? God, that's philosophical. Don't change your mind every 3 seconds. Yeah. Okay. That's right. Yeah, okay. So, but what if the problem changes every 3 seconds? Just wondering.
That's just challenge different from objective.
Sure.
I think that suggests that you're probably using the wrong framework. The problem's changing that.
Well, or it's the wrong problem, maybe. I don't know. It's almost always the wrong framework. It's basically always the wrong framework. So we've been through that. So let's say that the best product owner is always available, is enthusiastic, has good levels of domain knowledge, passionate, they're a clear decision maker, they're decisive, good communicator, they're adaptable, considerate or mindful, considered, they're a good listener, they have a good vision of the project, and they're approachable and available. Who's worked with a product owner like that stands true in all contexts? That's great. Is it you? the sound. Is that? I just noticed you had a label on. Is that? Okay. It's often not everyone. Okay, I would say. Rarely do you get that many people. So let's have a look at. This is the Agile Alliance. I hope it's not been updated because I haven't actually updated this slide for a couple of months. But this is as it was a few months ago, the Agile Alliance definition of a product owner. So we're going to have a look at some of this definition and kind of. So the product owner is a role on a product development team responsible for managing the product backlog in order to achieve the desired outcome that a product development team seeks to accomplish. So is that really what it is? Does that sound right? I don't know. That seems pretty good to me. When I was looking at this, when I first read this, I thought this seemed all right. You've got the product owner. They are a role on the product development team as opposed to leading it or leading it. They're part of that team. They're responsible for managing the product backlog. Well, that may or may not be true in some cases, but they're responsible to kind of setting and helping the team achieve the desired outcome. And this is the interesting thing of this for me. The outcome that the product development team seeks to accomplish. The whole team works together on that, deciding on that outcome, and the product owner is there almost as a facilitator by that definition. Unfortunately, this definition has some subpoints which then go on to completely contradict themselves. So this is a subpoint to this. So this is what the product owner is also meant to do. Clearly identify and describe the product backlog items in order to build a shared understanding of the product problem and solution with the product development team. This doesn't seem too bad, except there's an issue with this definition when you actually look into what it's saying. So this product owner is responsible for identifying the problems, then defining them, then solving the problem and communicating the problem and the solution to the team. My understanding is that anyway, at which point I guess the team go to the pub, say thanks for doing all of our work, and get on with it. I think that this is one of the biggest problems with some definitions of product ownership. Is the product owners spend all of this time trying to break the problem down, often sat on their own at their desk with Jira in front of them, desperately trying to fill backlogs with all of the requirements, often with very little support, because they feel they have to solve these problems. And then it goes on to another one. Make decisions regarding the priority of the product backlog items in order to deliver the maximum outcome with minimum output. I still don't know what the hell that means, other than the fact that maximum outcome sounds like something the Terminator would say. Maximum outcome, or something like that. How does a product owner make these decisions? How do we know what should be number 1 versus number 10 or number 9022 if you're using Jira or Rally or some other tool that allows you to create long backlogs? How do we know what's the most important thing? Pardon?
It could be the top of the backlog.
Yeah, but how do we know what is a product owner is responsible for ordering those things? How do they know what should be at the top? Driven by the stakeholders. How do they know?
You shouting at them?
Pardon? Yeah, potentially. How do they know what problem they're trying to solve? So depending on who the ethereal kind of stake. Pardon? Speak to the customer. That's a brilliant idea. Who currently in the team are obviously working? I assume the majority of you are working on some kind of software-related teams. Who in here presently uses user experience research as a kind of a core direction for their product direction? That is, even though there is a fairly small number of hands here, that's higher than I've seen in the times I've done this now. If you're not using user experience, so for everyone else who's not talking to the customer by definition, how do we make those decisions? It gets up, we're at the stakeholder level now, so some stakeholders, they're the one that's shouting the loudest. How do they know, how does this person that's shouting the loudest know that the thing they're shouting the loudest about is the most important thing and should be at the top of the backlog? They don't. Pardon?
It's the most important thing to them, there and then.
Yeah, okay.
Perceived value.
Perceived value, okay. Perceived value, that's a wonderful phrase. Sorry, go on. Someone was saying something.
I was going to say, you've also got the problem of the proxy product owner, where they're in that position and they're told what the priorities are by the senior product owners or senior stakeholders based on what feedback they have. And then that starts to priority filter down to the team, go back through the product owner. They're unable to answer those challenges because they don't actually know why that's become a priority. So that's an even bigger problem.
So, proxy product owner, in my opinion, whereas product owner may be an anti-pattern, proxy product owner almost always is an anti-pattern. One of the words, in fact, that we didn't come up with, that you reminded me of with that story, was the word empowered often comes up. And frequently one of the biggest issues I've seen are product owners that are no more than messengers for the external loud, shouty stakeholders. And that's basically their entire role. In fact, I worked on a project where there was about 45 stakeholders spread across the globe, and the particular product owner pretty much couldn't make a decision without getting a good 3/4 of those people to agree to the decisions that they were making without some, I don't know, penalty of death bestowed upon him, which made him significantly less available than the team needed him to be. Despite the fact he was actually co-located, it didn't really matter because he couldn't make a decision on anything the team needed, or in fact often give information to the team that they needed about certain things, about direction and things that could use them and guide them towards things. Okay, so here's another little bit. Determine whether a product backlog item was satisfactorily delivered. How? How do we know that? How do we know that we've delivered something? The answer? Acceptance criteria. So that's a fun one. Okay. I think whether or not we can say something's delivered based on acceptance criteria is strongly dependent on the acceptance criteria, because I've seen teams negotiate the acceptance criteria as far away from the customer as possible, because in many situations it's incredibly hard to actually get access to the customer in order to say, did we actually satisfy your needs and desires and wants and everything else? It's on the server. In fact, in some cases, it's on the development server. It's been staged. I mean, you can get pretty far away before you know whether or not you've actually delivered value. There are many issues with this particular question. Often, it is the product owner's job to decide on that, but actually I question whether or not that's useful, because to me, they're only ever in a position of a proxy product owner. Sure, they'll have a better understanding of whether or not something's finished, maybe, if they've got some of the assets and attributes that we discussed. But actually, the only person that's going to tell you if your stuff's done is the customer at the end of the day. They're the only people that matter anyway. Sorry?
But is that partly reading that as if they determine it, so is they're responsible for it?
They are in some, absolutely, they are in some contexts. Yeah, I agree with that. So there's nothing wrong with how they decide on that. If how they decide on that is a conversation with the customer to say, are you happy? You know, here it is, it's live, it's there in your hands. Has this satisfied your needs, and getting feedback? Yeah, that's fine to some degree, as long as it's scalable. But it is still, I think they end up falling into that proxy product owner kind of hole, really, in some cases, because it's kind of like, well, the team really could just be talking to the customer directly. And the fact that with user experience, teams could and can and should talk to their customers directly, that does not remove the need for a product owner's presence. It's just that at the moment, I think that many product owners are nothing more than messengers, you know, between stakeholders or external customers or anything else. They actually don't fulfill a lot of the things we'd like them to do. And then finally, this is an interesting one. Ensure transparency into the upcoming work of the product development team. So what I find confusing about this is this question of, well, if they're ensuring transparency, to me, I read that as them. They're the ones responsible, almost like they're gatekeepers for the work. And I've seen product owners take this quite literally, where they don't want to show the team too much. Don't want to show the team the whole backlog. Yeah, I've got 3 months worth of plans here, but I want to show them the next month, because we wouldn't want them to just go crazy and start delivering stuff from month 5 or something, you know. And I've seen some POs do this thing where they sort of are trying to, they don't want to feed too much, don't want to muddy the water. And then at the other end, you've got the opposite of that, which is, yeah, everyone can see our 10,000 long Jira backlog. It's completely transparent. I don't really understand why anyone would need to ensure transparency of the backlog, because the backlog should just be there and visible, and there shouldn't be a need to make it transparent. It just is. It's just, this is the work, the stuff we're working on. And it also then asks another question, which is around, well, if there's this person that's kind of acting as this gatekeeper, well, where does the work come from in the first place? Is this coming from the product owner directly, or could it come from the team? Could it come from anywhere else? Where is this work coming from? Which leads us on to the next question. So where does the work come from? Where does it come from? We sort of asked that a little bit earlier, but where does it come from generally? Who's creating the work? If you imagine you're a software engineer on a team, you're working on stuff, okay, day to day, every day. Where does that work come from? The customer, okay. Does it come from, as we said, we don't work with user experience for the most of the time, so most of us aren't working on teams where it is coming directly from the customer. It's not, you know, the user of the website ringing you up saying the button's broken or something's happened, or I would like to be able to book a hotel using my Avios points or whatever it is, depending on the client you're working for. It's not often then directly. So does it come from the product owner? Is that where the work originates? Above? Okay, so how do they, we kind of discussed a little bit before about how do they know what to do, you know. So how do they know? Like when we talk, like practically, we kind of pushed this up a little bit, and we said, well, if they're not doing user experience, they don't know, but they are still making decisions. They are still issuing work. They are still saying, this is important. So how do they know? What is the way of perceiving value, or perception of value before? So what is that way of, how do we do that? Pardon? So it's just literally just saying, it seems like there's potentially some money over here, or whatever, some potential growth opportunities there. Let's just direct the team in that direction. How do they know that's the right decision? We don't. Go on. It's plagiarism. So I love that one. I like that point the best, actually, which is how, because I can see it as like, this is the ultimate business strategy, is to be just that little bit behind your competition, just a little bit, you know. That's where we want to place ourselves, just a little bit behind the competition. So yeah, that way, but it's great. That means they shoulder all of the risk. We only ever take on what they're doing that's successful. It seems like a solid strategy to me, in theory. Okay. So we don't really know what we're doing. And how good do you think we are at knowing what to do in general, especially if we're using true and tried and tested practices like just do what the competition do? How good do you think we are? Good? Anyone have a guess at how good we are? All right, I won't torture you anymore. We're not very good. So this is a study now. The Standish group, if you've heard of them, they do a bunch of largely highly controversial studies based on things like how many the project success rate in the IT industry, and in this particular study called Exceeding Value, they were looking at how frequently features delivered on business critical software are used, okay, based on a very poorly defined way of kind of measuring. They're not very good at structuring their questions, so people tend to throw their arms up and saying, look, come on, this is nonsense. But this was still taken over about 100, 150 kind of mission critical projects internally used in big, large organizations in listed companies. Now, let's assume there is a big error rate here, okay? what you still have is anything between, we've got 80% by this measure of features that are hardly ever or infrequently used by the end user. Okay. They have another study in the chaos study where they actually say that around 50% are never used. By their definition, never is as features that are literally never even touched, not like the backup feature that's used once every 12 months. It's literally say the customers don't even know it exists. Which 80% seems about true for something like Microsoft Word. If you've ever used it recently, I seem to find I can never find anything that I need it to do, like, I don't know, write or change the font, but I can always find the random features that no one ever seems to use. So this, even with a big error margin, is a pretty stark judgment of our ability in the software industry generally to know what our customers want, especially, unsurprisingly in a way, if we try to do that without, asking them. So yeah, this is pretty depressing. What things can we do to improve this situation? So the most important thing is something that I will tell you later. Before we do that, I want to go back in history and introduce this chap to you. Does anyone know who this is? Anyone recognise him? Pardon? Yeah, he does look a bit like that, doesn't he? Yeah. His name is actually Frederick Winslow Taylor. You may have heard of him now. He's known as the father of scientific management, and he's a well-known humanitarian from the early 20th century. He's known with the high regard in which he held his workers. This is a quote from him: "The ordinary pig iron handler is not the type of man well suited to shoveling. He's too stupid there." All right, so he's not a humanitarian. Too much knack required of a shoveler for the pig iron handler to take so kindly to shoveling. He wasn't a humanitarian. He was, in fact, though, a scientist in the way that he approached. Now, while he is unfortunately, in some of the things that we will talk about, he has and still is very much an inspiration to large amounts of modern management practice, despite his management practice being forged in the metalworking factories in North America, at the turn of last century even. While he, what he lacked in his kind of humanitarian attitude, he did have, and he was one of the first people to really look at the scientific process and using data to forge decisions in organisations. So I want to have a look at what one of the things he did. So Taylor worked, as I said, in a metalwork factory, and what he wanted to do was improve efficiency. Okay, he was really keen to just look at the process. You've got all of these people processing metal into various things. I think in their context, they were building things for processing metal for things like panels used in steam trains and things like that, of that sort of thing. Okay, so he's got all of these people working at various stations, and he wants to improve efficiency. So he started by breaking down every process into its component parts, and then he measured each part to the 100th of a minute. And he measured each of the different stations across the factory floor. Okay, this is actually what he later referred to and has been referred to in his work as a time and motion study. Again, if you've been in any kind of traditional business training, you probably have heard some of these words dotted about. But he found, to his horror, that there was massive discrepancies between each of the stations. You would have 5 people doing the same job, and they'd all do it differently. These people, they consider themselves to be craftspeople, for goodness sakes, these worms working in the factory floor. And they all thought they had their own approach. One was shoveling with the shovel his mum bought him for Christmas, and the other person just wanted to use his arms and carry it around. The other person said, it's better, I'm strong, I can carry like 2 loads. And it was different across the thing, and they all had their own approaches, even though they were doing similar roles. And he had this idea to identify one true way for each of the processes, one true process, the most efficient process in his measure. And what he wanted to do is to discover what this process was, and then dictate it to the workers who why would they possibly want to do it the wrong way, not his way? So how did he discover the one true way? Well, he looked at what he knew currently, i.e. he's got all of this data about the measurements that he's taken, all of this information about how long it takes shovelers to work and pig iron handlers to do their job. And he formed a hypothesis. Well, maybe if I make a small change, I might get this outcome. So in this case, it could be, I've got a shovel. I'd like to see what happens if they all use the same size shovel. Now, believe it or not, he literally wrote pages and pages specifically on shovel sizes. There is a huge amount of information about the sizes of shovels that Taylor has written. And he hypothesized, okay, let's try out this shovel. I think that might improve efficiency. And then he tests it with an experiment. In his case, that means walking around the 5 or 6 people at each of their stations saying, use this shovel. And they say no, and he says, you're fired, and then brings in someone who's willing to use the shovel. He had such a way with people. And this experiment then demonstrates the validity of his hypothesis, which produced learning. And sometimes his hypothesis might be invalidated. Other times it's validated. There's learning regardless of whether or not he has learned from that experiment. And that new information is fed back in, and we create another hypothesis. Okay, well, that I noticed a little improvement. I wonder, maybe let's make the shovel a bit smaller again and see if that improves things. Oh, no, it didn't work that time. Maybe that's about the right size. So this is actually continuous learning. This is the foundation of the idea behind continuous learning. Continuous hypothesis. How do we make a decision? We come up with a hypothesis. We test the hypothesis. That gives us learning, which feeds into further learning, further hypotheses that we use to make changes. The issue that he had was that this environment of continuous learning that he created was limited to the upper echelons of his organization. In his view, the upper echelons, the senior, the management, etc., they were literally the only people with the mental capacity for this kind of planning work, by his words, which is unfortunate. So what was Taylor missing? In some respects, he was almost on the right track. As we just stated, even now, today, we don't often make decisions based on data. Okay, that's a very good idea. Okay, we frequently don't do that. So let's fast forward a few decades. Around the same time, Aretha Franklin was releasing this. Over the other side of the Atlantic, or the Pacific even, there was this guy. Who knows who this guy is? Pardon? Sorry? Toyota. Yeah, well, he's not. It's not Toyota. It's someone related to Toyota. Pardon? Oh no. All right. Taiichi Ohno. I'm nearly there. So Taiichi Ohno. Between 1948 and 1975, e.g. Toyota, as you mentioned, and Taiichi Ohno, they worked together to develop the Toyota production system. And that later became known as, you may have heard of lean manufacturing. Lean manufacturing, thanks to Mary and Tom Poppendick, became lean software eventually. So we've heard about these ideas. Okay. He had somewhat different attitudes to workers' abilities than Taylor. So a nice quote from Taiichi Ohno is, people don't go to Toyota to work, they go there to think. Clearly, he doesn't think that the individuals in the upper echelons of Toyota are the only people that have the capacity for this planning work. So let's look at what that means. So in 2001, interestingly, just around the same time that the Agile Manifesto was written, Toyota wrapped up its philosophy and values in a thing they call the Toyota Way. So there are 14 principles grouped into 2 key areas, or 2 pillars. Now, this talk is not about Toyota or lean principles. We will discuss some of these, and I'm not going to go into everything at all in around lean and lean principles and these ideas. but I really, really do recommend that people do. This stuff is foundational. The vast majority of what came into Agile and what was born in the Agile Manifesto was fed by this work. And what's more, and I don't want to be overly lean-centric, but one of the important things around the Toyota Way, and it's available, you can Google it, you'll find loads of information about it, is that the Toyota Way, while the Agile Manifesto was made by a bunch of software engineers who had been doing software for the limited amount of time that it was possible to have been doing software at around 2001, the Toyota Way is founded on, it was created in the 1960s and is a kind of a consolidation of their philosophies and thoughts towards leadership, towards management, and towards the day-to-day running of work. This is tried and tested practices that they have been implementing over a very long period of time. So I recommend we look into that. We'll go into a few. Now, before I go into that, I'm going to show a little video. Now, hopefully, we'll be able to hear the audio okay. I tried to turn it up. It's just a couple of minutes from somewhere not far away from here. Can you hear that? Yeah.
It's quite overwhelming when you walk through Postit.
You got things flying everywhere, boxes and trucks.
When you walk through the door and you actually see how big the place is.
After you've been here and you realise how everything operates, you can understand why everything's in a certain place, everything has to be in a certain place.
My name's Pete Dennis. I started here in May the 11th, 1992. I left mine and I applied for the position of team member in the press shop. I got took on as a team leader when we first started here in 1992. I can remember walking into the press shop, bearing in mind the presses I worked on were probably maximum up to 50 ton. I walked into there and they're 3,000 ton presses and it was about as big as a block of flats. So that was a little bit daunting for me. The Toyota production system is the foundation of what Toyota do. Every single member here has the right to stop the line. If he sees something that's not quite right, we have what we call the ambulance system. He has the right to stop that line. Everybody's involved in it. It's not just top down. We encourage it, as we call it, bottom up. So if a team member comes to me and says, I have an idea for this, you don't ignore it. Because nobody has a better idea than that member. The biggest asset we've got is the guys that work here. It's not because you cut them open and the lock sticker on and you've got Toyota to do it. That's not it. It's just the amount of faith and pride that people have got. And they will do what they can to help this company because they know it's helping them at the end of the day.
Stop it before it gets too marketing-y. Clearly, that is a recruitment video for Toyota. Couple of interesting things that came out for me that came out of that video. Firstly, I don't know if people have heard of the andon cord in the Toyota production system. See the guy actually using it, which I quite liked. The other interesting point with that video was a point he said, if anyone has an idea, they come straight to me, they come up to him, or anyone in the team. Now, Toyota have a pretty good record. So who has a suggestion box in their organisation? Does anyone even have one? Yeah, oh, good. We've kind of given up on it in the Western world slightly. So Toyota have, at current standing, around 300,000 staff. Okay. What do you think, on average, their annual how many annual suggestions do you think they receive on an annual basis? That's a guess. Any ideas? But a few, yeah. So they get around 1 million every year. What percentage of those do you think they implement on an annual basis? 0.5%, so it's around just over 95% of the suggestions that people come in. The question they use in Toyota is, what is the smallest thing you could do to improve your job or the goal of the company? It's a really important question, and that's related to one of the concepts that we'll go into called Kaizen, which you will have heard of. Kaizen, as well as its many translations, can also mean small change as well as good change, and they take that to the point. It's very easy for people to envisage what a small change might be. What's the smallest thing I could do today to make that? The other thing is that the vast majority of the ideas that are submitted into their suggestion system are actually submitted after they've been implemented. The individuals have the autonomy to implement them. They want them recorded. They want to know what's happened. But a lot of the time, they generally say we prefer action over thought. So people will go in and say, oh, I had this idea today and I did it. It's done. And they file it away. So that's why they have such a high rate, is that people are authorized. It's not trying to convince your boss to make a change. They go and do it. This is going to make it better. And the team and as an organization, as you said, everyone on the floor are the experts in what they do. So why would the manager have any additional comment to make about them wanting to improve the work, the job that they're doing? So we'll have a look into a few of the things here. So these two pillars, slide too quickly. These are the two pillars of the Toyota Way: continuous improvement and respect for people. So I think we can already see that perhaps Taylor had this idea kind of nailed, perhaps lacked a little bit on the second pillar. So one of the elements, and once we get down to it, is one of the things they require is that the organization becomes a learning organization with what they call Hansai and Kaizen, as we mentioned, Kaizen being good change or small change. And Hansai, which is reflection. Interestingly, we have another phrase in the Agile world that we use to reflect. What do we do a lot of the time? Retrospectives, yeah. It could be, yeah. Yeah. So we become a learning organisation. The suggestion box is actually still part of that. Obviously, it's an organisation. They're continually listening. Okay, as a basic idea. So all the time we are, all the time they see the frontline staff as the most qualified people in the organisation to be making these changes, and as a whole organisation, they support that learning and change process. Then we have a thing called Nemwashi, build consensus. So what does this mean? This means that when they face a problem in some way, something happens. So someone pulls the and-on cord, as we saw in the thing. The line stops at that point. They face an issue. Oh, look, there's an issue with that. There's a quality problem here. Something's going wrong. As a group, because at that point the line stopped, so anyone can walk over and have a conversation with this person at that particular station, say what's going on. Generally, the managers will come straight down, which is another basic principle. You may have heard the phrase Gemba, and that means getting to the work, going to where the work is done. So they'll come right down, and they'll look at the problem together. And what they're going to do is come up with some solution through consensus. So as a group of people, you'll end up with a collection of people around here. They're going to have a discussion about the problem and come up with some ideas, potential solutions, potential ideas. And they will take and deliberately give plenty of time to coming up with that idea, that potential solution. They say, make decisions slowly, but implement them quickly. So this is building consensus. And then they have this concept called standardized work. Once they've built consensus around an idea or a solution, it goes into their standardized work. Now, standardized work, this basic idea that people do the same thing. If we are doing shoveling pig iron, that we all shovel pig iron in roughly the same way. That kind of actually makes a lot of sense. These are pretty strictly procedural processes that are simple. If I'm, these are processes that there genuinely is a best practice or a best approach to doing these things in most situations. The difference is their definition of standardized work. So standardized tasks and processes are the foundation for continuous improvement and employee empowerment is their definition. Now, what I find interesting about it is, well, firstly, I don't think employee empowerment were two words in Taylor's vocabulary, but it's important to say, well, why would they be part of employee empowerment? Well, this is just a recipe. Well, it's because the consensus that forms within the team themselves form this consensus. The team themselves maintain what they consider as a team to be their standardized work. They agree together. It's why those suggestions get implemented right away, because if I'm a team member, I have ownership over this, shared ownership with the team. I say, I've got an idea. The team says, yeah, that seems like a good idea. Let's try it out. Let's do an experiment. It works. Great. Let's put it into our standardized work. Let's get it up there so we all do that. Let's share it with the other factories so people doing the same task understand the improvements that we've made here. Let's have a look at how this might work. So here we have a little factory. This is my brilliant Keynote animation. And look, we have a defect. We have a defect. And oh, he notices the defect and he pulls the line. All right. So at this point, the manager glides over. He's wearing wheelies, you know, and says, "What's up? What's going on?" And he's going to say, "Oh, you know, there's a notch in the boxes that we're making. Look, I don't know where that's coming from. So I stopped the line. I saw a quality problem." And he goes, "Okay, well, what do you think's going on there?" The manager says to him, "What do you think's happening?" He said, "Well, I don't know. I think it could be over at the machining station. I think they've had some issues." And the manager goes, "Well, you know what? Actually, I've only just come from there. I think they're looking okay. I think that's fine. Maybe it could be somewhere else." He said, "Well, I mean, it could be. Look, it's kind of near where the door is. You know, in this whatever this thing might be. It could be a car. Maybe it's over there. Maybe it's at that station." So together, they're going to walk over and speak to Mary, who's at the other station, and they're going to be having this conversation. At this point, they can see now, oh, look, yeah, this is where the defect is introduced. Now, other people may well join. There weren't enough, you know, people-shaped things in Keynote for me to add lots and lots of people here. But at this point, the line is stopped, okay? So people could well, other people, anyone can come over. The whole line is stopped. There is nothing flowing anywhere. So people are stood around doing nothing at this point. God forbid, you know, this was certainly in Ford's original ideas. The idea of continuous flow and never stopping the line was very, very important. So this idea that you might stop the line often multiple times a day, thousands of times a month in some cases in Toyota, is kind of crazy, but it's critical to the way they operate. So what they're doing here is forming consensus. They have conversations about it. Now, one of the things that this is a chap called James Womack, and he says, over time, I've come to realize that this problem-solving process is actually the highest form of respect. So what he means by that is this is the leadership. If you notice in that little engagement, the first thing the leader did was actually question the first thing that the person suggested. Okay. Now, how many people in an engineering position have just been, oh, for goodness sakes, can't the managers see? I'm the expert here. I know what I'm talking about. You know, why do they even bother to question me? Well, there's a specific, interesting relationship here. That first question is not seen as patronizing. Now, there are some specific interesting things at Toyota, like, for example, everyone in a leadership position at Toyota is actually brought up from the ranks. These people have almost all been on the floor at some point, so they do have some context. Okay, but at the same time, not everyone. They have this relationship which says, as a manager, I respect your close-up knowledge, ability, and dedication to solve the problem. And as a team member, I respect your, and this is to the manager, your big picture perspective that allows you to ask me the tough questions that guide me to better solutions. And that's what they define as mutual respect. So if you're not solving the problems collaboratively, and that goes in both directions, engaging teams, engaging the product ownership and the leadership and the other way around, then you're missing out on both the greatest strengths of your team and also Agile's superpower. So I said before, there was the one thing, the secret thing that we're missing. Does anyone guess what that word is? What should we be doing that we're potentially not doing? Should be really obvious. Begins with a C. Woo! All right. Yeah, there we go. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not the biggest surprise. This isn't meant to be revolutionary. We need to collaborate more. We often don't. In fact, we find all kinds of reasons why we don't collaborate in teams. endless reasons, often around lacking communication. You know, just as a general point, you are allowed to communicate outside of the traditional Agile ceremonies. Just a general rule. It's possible. You don't have to be in a stand-up, a retrospective, or a planning meeting, or a brooming session. I think that's the old word now. They're not allowed to say that anymore. You're not allowed to be in any of those rooms or any of those potentially uncomfortable situations in order to communicate. You can just speak to one another. And there are some other interesting points, like Slack will not improve your communication. Okay, I've actually seen that. I was away for a couple of weeks with a team I was working with in Leeds. I arrived and they had just done a retrospective the morning that I hadn't been in. And I was just perusing the cards on the board, and one of them said, "Switch to Slack to improve communication." And it made me sigh a little bit inside, especially as this team was 99.9% co-located in a room no bigger than this one. I wondered what their problems with communication might in fact be, but I knew that Slack was not the solution. Okay, so how can we bring collaboration into our product ownership? There are some interesting problems here to look at. And isn't it meant to be a one-person show? Isn't that right? Isn't it meant to be a single wringable neck? The one throat to choke, which I think is even worse than single wringable neck, actually. Let's tie this together. Let's have a look. So, how do we do it? If you're a product owner on a team, how about you start by bringing a hypothesis to your team, an idea that might solve the problem or bring you closer to your goal. The team's job is to figure out the simplest way, the minimum output, to validate or invalidate this hypothesis. Unsurprisingly, I do this with an experiment. This provides learning, which is the outcome. The team have not failed if they invalidate the hypothesis. In fact, I strongly recommend that you ask the team. You ask the team explicitly as a product owner, say, I would like you to find the cheapest, quickest way to invalidate this idea that I have. Ask them to invalidate. There's a reason why in the science world, scientists spend a lot of time trying to invalidate that hypothesis rather than prove them. There's a completely different talk, but we have a thing called confirmation bias, which is really, really important to consider. Ask them to validate it, and you and the team, especially the potential leadership environment or leadership relationship you have with them, they will be desperately trying to prove you right, which is exactly what you don't want. We want that conflict. We want you to be wrong. As we learn from those. Learning is the outcome here, and learning will always move you closer to your goal, regardless of whether they invalidate you. Knowing what doesn't work is just as important as knowing what does. As you learn more, you will gain certainty in your various hypotheses. And the scientific community call this consensus. So, in science, someone produces a theory. This theory is presented as a paper and it's published often to a peer-reviewed journal of some kind, hopefully. Not always, but generally, hopefully. And over time, other scientists and other people, sometimes their own team, the original team, will try to challenge that, and they will do experiments to prove or disprove that particular theory. Nothing is ever considered certain. No one ever thinks that there is certainty in this. Something is a theory, and we generally have and agree that we say, yeah, we kind of think this is true. Okay, we think this correlates to the evidence. There is a correlation here to what we know of the evidence in front of us. But we don't know if it's right. It's definitely not right, and it's definitely not certain. Right now, the evidence is correlating in that particular direction. Don't hold anything sacred in your team. Allow the consensus to form naturally around the results to your experimentation. And as a team, you will learn. And make sure it's safe to question anything at any time. If there isn't consensus in the team around an idea that you're proposing, well, maybe it's not the best idea. So, the 5 pillars of collaborative product ownership. We got there eventually. What are we going to... Let's go through this. So, number 1, respect your people. And you can show this respect by not bringing them solutions to implement. Show your team The respect, show your team you respect their ability to solve the problems you bring them. Bring them problems and say, this is where we're trying to go. This is the direction we want to move in. We want to go somewhere over that hill. We don't quite know how far yet. How can we know when we've got further enough? Ask them these questions. Help them form the experiments. Embrace uncertainty. It is my opinion that nothing is more damaging to organizations than fake certainty. We need to accept the inherent uncertainty that exists in our projects and not pretend we have certainty when it doesn't exist. As a general point, asking your team for an estimate on something that requires exploration is pretending we have certainty that doesn't exist. They will not be able to tell you how long something takes if the thing that they are exploring is a question. If it's a question, then they don't know the answer to it yet. Hence, they do not know how far they've gone. You can make safe-to-fail experiments by time-boxing these questions. Identify that teams are answering a question as opposed to implementing a set of steps. And keep it small and say, go away for a day. See what you find out in a day and see if we've learnt enough to continue to gain and grown in our certainty with the experiments that you've put in. Small experiments. Work with your team to overcome the uncertainty by collaborating with them on small experiments that will gradually build a shared understanding of the problem space throughout the team. This is building consensus, okay? You look at the thing that you're trying to solve, understand the problem. You often won't have a full understanding of the problem. It's very unlikely you will have a full understanding of the problem. Frankly, if there isn't uncertainty in the area that you're working in, there's probably not much value either. Work with the team. We experiment in order to reduce uncertainty. And then continuous learning. With every experiment you do, you will have learning, even when it invalidates your theory. Learning will always move you towards a goal, even when it seems you haven't moved. It's really important. When you learn, when you have 1,000 options in front of you, and you know that there are only a handful of those who are going to deliver the outcomes that you want, knowing which 990 not to go down is just as important as knowing the 10 that might. In fact, those ones are the ones that are going to kill your project eventually. No complacency. Allow consensus to build naturally across the team, but ensure it's safe to question anything, even the things that seem certain, especially the things that seem certain. Don't get complacent with anything. So, product owners should respect the people on the team by collaborating with them on solving problems and embracing the uncertainty of reality. Teams can overcome uncertainty by using small experiments to test their hypotheses, which lead to continuous learning and builds consensus on the validity or invalidity of a theory. But no team should ever be complacent with the present state of understanding, and it should always be safe to question anything, however certain it might seem. So, could I ask the product owners to stand up again, please? Sorry. I'll be nice this time. So, one of the brilliant things about collaboration, and when you become a team member rather than even an implied team leader or leadership role, where you actually become essentially a domain expert on the team that's helping the team come to the right decisions through experimentation. Well, could you take off your labels, please? Welcome to the team. Thank you very much.